The engine sputtered, then died. Just like that, my car rolled to a halt on the side of the empty road. I slammed my hands against the steering wheel, letting out a frustrated groan. Of course, this would happen now. I muttered under my breath, glancing at the clock. Late. Again. My phone was no help, no signal. Not a single bar to call for a tow, or even text Ryder. I sighed, stepping out into the warm afternoon air, the sun glaring down as I popped the hood. I stared at the engine, clueless. What am I even looking at? I whispered, trying to remember anything Ryder had ever said about cars. Useless. The wires and metal parts blurred together in my vision. I reached out, hesitating, as if touching something might magically fix it. Maybe if I just wiggle this, I thought, my fingers brushing against a loose wire. Nothing. Of course. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made me jump. I turned, shielding my eyes from the sun, as a black truck pulled up behind me. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a weathered flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that immediately caught my attention. His jeans were worn, but they fit him just right, and his boots looked like they'd seen a lifetime of work. He had a messy mop of dark hair, and a smile that was both confident and warm. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice smooth and steady, like he already knew the answer. I hesitated, glancing back at my car. "I think it's the engine?" I said, realizing how ridiculous I sounded. He chuckled, and the sound sent a strange shiver through me. "Stop it, Ava," I scolded myself. He walked over, his presence somehow filling the space around me. "Let's take a look," he said, leaning under the hood. His sleeves rode up further as he worked, and I couldn't help but notice the way his muscles moved. I bit my lip, forcing myself to look away. "I'm Ethan, by the way," he said, not looking up. "And you are?" "Ava," I replied, my voice softer than I intended. "And I'm really sorry about all this." He glanced up, his eyes meeting mine. They were a deep, intense blue, like the ocean on a stormy day. "Don't be. It's what I do." He flashed another smile before turning back to the engine. "Looks like your generator's shot. I can get it running enough to get you to my shop, though." "Your shop?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Why does that feel like a loaded question? "Yeah, just a few miles down the road." "I'll fix it proper there," he said, pulling out a wrench from his truck. "Unless you'd rather call someone else?" No, I said quickly, maybe too quickly. "That's fine. Thank you." He nodded, already working on the engine. I watched him, mesmerized by the way his hands moved, confident, precise. Ryder couldn't fix a toaster, I thought suddenly, and immediately felt guilty for comparing them. I crossed my arms, leaning against the side of the car, trying to distract myself. "So, Ava," Ethan said after a moment, breaking the silence. "What brings you out here? This isn't exactly a busy road." I shrugged, unsure how much to share. "Just driving. Clearing my head, I guess." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Things with Ryder had been off lately. Distant. We'd been together for years, but lately, it felt like we were just going through the motions. Ethan glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes a little time alone is all you need," he said, his voice softening. "But it's nice to have someone to talk to when you're ready." His words hit something deep inside me, and I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name. Longing? Guilt? I wasn't sure. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I guess it is." By the time he finished, the sun was lower in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over everything. He wiped his hands on a rag, nodding toward his truck. "I'll follow you to the shop, just to make sure you get there okay." "Thanks," I said, feeling a strange mix of relief and nervousness. What am I even doing? I slid back into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the wheel a little too tightly. As I pulled onto the road, I could see him in my rearview mirror, his truck keeping a steady distance. His presence was comforting, which only made me more confused. The shop was small but well-kept, with tools neatly organized and a faint smell of oil in the air. Ethan parked beside me, hopping out with that same easy confidence. "Welcome to my world," he said, gesturing to the shop with a grin. I stepped inside, glancing around. "It's nice," I said, realizing how inadequate that sounded. "I mean, it's got character." He laughed, and the sound made me smile despite myself. "Character. I like that." He walked over to a workbench, picking up a wrench. "You can hang out here while I get started. Or, if you're feeling adventurous, I could use an extra pair of hands." "Adventurous might be pushing it," I said, but I stepped closer anyway, curious. "But I can try." He handed me a smaller tool, his fingers brushing against mine. This is dangerous, I thought, but I didn't pull away. Instead, I watched as he explained what he was doing, his voice low and steady. I barely understood half of it, but I let myself get lost in the sound of his words, in the way he moved, in the warmth of his presence. We worked in silence for a while, the air between us charged with something I couldn't quite name. Then, out of nowhere, he looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're not like most people who come in here," he said, his tone soft but intense. "Most people just want their car fixed, and to get out as fast as possible. You're different." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Different how?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off him. "Different in a way that makes me want to know more," he said, his gaze unwavering. "But maybe that's just me." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could say anything, the sound of a car pulling up interrupted us. Ethan glanced toward the door, his expression shifting slightly. "That'll be Lucas," he said, taking a step back. "He's my business partner. You'll like him." I felt a flicker of disappointment, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because the moment was over, I thought. Or maybe because I wasn't ready to face whatever it was that had just passed between us. As Lucas walked in, his presence seemed to fill the room in a completely different way than Ethan's. He was tall, with a cocky grin and a playful glint in his eye. Well, what do we have here?" he said, looking me up and down in a way that made my cheeks flush. Ethan shook his head, but there was a hint of amusement in his tone. "This is Ava. Her car's giving her some trouble. And you're here to fix it, right?" Lucas said, winking at me. "Or maybe just to keep her company." I laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. This is getting out of hand, I thought, but part of me didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive. And I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a very, very bad one. I shifted uncomfortably under Lucas's gaze, my fingers twirling the hem of my blouse. Ethan stepped in, his voice calm but firm. "Let's get back to the car, yeah? We're not here to make Ava feel like a sideshow." Lucas raised his hands in mock surrender, his grin never fading. "Just trying to lighten the mood. No harm in that, right?" I managed a small smile, though my heart was pounding. The air between us felt charged, like a spark waiting to ignite. Ethan led the way back to my car, his movements confident and unhurried. Lucas trailed behind, his presence a constant reminder of the unspoken tension wrapping itself around us. Ethan popped the hood and leaned over the engine, his flannel shirt stretching across his broad shoulders. I couldn't help but watch the way his muscles moved as he worked, the sweat glistening on his forearms. It was mesmerizing, and I felt a flush creep up my neck. "Generator shot," he said after a moment, straightening up and wiping his hands on a rag. "We got a spare in the shop. Shouldn't take too long to fix." "Thank you," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I really appreciate your help." He shrugged, his eyes meeting mine. "It's what I do. Besides, you looked like you needed it." There was something in his tone, a warmth that made my chest tighten. I glanced away, only to catch Lucas watching me with that same playful glint in his eye. "So, Ava," Lucas said, leaning against the car with his arms crossed. "What brings you out here all alone? You're not from around here, are you?" I shook my head, feeling exposed under his scrutiny. "Just passing through." My car had other plans, apparently. "Lucky for us," he said with a wink. I laughed nervously, my fingers fidgeting at my sides. Ethan shot Lucas a look, but there was no real annoyance in it. Just something else. Something I couldn't quite name. We'll get this fixed up, Ethan said, breaking the silence. You can wait inside if you want. Coffee's fresh. I hesitated, glancing between the two of them. Actually, if it's okay, I'd like to watch. I've always been curious about how cars work. Ethan's lips curved into a small smile.
Sure.
Maybe you'll learn something. Lucas chuckled. Or maybe we'll just give her a show. I rolled my eyes, but there was no real irritation in it. These two, I thought they're going to be the death of me. As Ethan began working on the generator, I found myself drawn into the rhythm of his movements. He explained things as he went, his voice steady and reassuring. Lucas chimed in occasionally, his comments laced with humor that kept me on edge. It wasn't long before the repair was done, and Ethan closed the hood with a satisfied nod.
There.
Should be good as new. Thank you, I said again, my gratitude genuine. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped. Guess it's your lucky day, Lucas said, his grin widening. Or maybe ours. Ethan shot him a look, but there was no real reprimand in it. Instead, he turned back to me, his eyes searching mine. You're good to drive now, but if you ever need anything else, you know where to find us. I nodded, my heart skipping a beat. Why does that sentence feel like more than just an offer for car repairs? Lucas stepped closer, his presence impossibly large. Or if you just want some company, he added, his voice low and teasing. I swallowed hard, the air between us thickening. I'll keep that in mind, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the moment. We should probably get back to the shop. Lots of work to do. Yeah, Lucas agreed, though his eyes lingered on me. But you're always welcome here, Ava. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and disappointment as they began to walk away. But before I could open my car door, Lucas turned back, his grin softer now. Hey, he said, if you're not in a rush, we've got a little tradition here. Friday nights, we close up the shop, crank up some music, and just unwind. You should join us. I hesitated, my mind racing. What would Ryder think? What am I even doing? But the pull was too strong, the promise of something different, something alive, irresistible. I'll think about it, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Lucas's grin widened. Don't think too hard, Ava. Sometimes you just have to live in the moment. I watched as they disappeared into the shop, my heart pounding in my chest. Living in the moment, I thought. Maybe that's what I've been missing. But as I got into my car and drove away, the image of Ryder's face flashed in my mind. The guilt was there, simmering beneath the surface, but so was something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. What if I'm not ready to let go? But as I reached the highway, the hum of the engine beneath me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at a crossroads. And I wasn't sure which path to take. Friday night came faster than I expected. I told Ryder I'd be late, that I had some errands to run. He didn't question it, his focus elsewhere as usual. When I pulled up to the shop, the lights were dim, and the sound of music spilled out into the night. My heart raced as I stepped inside, the warmth of the room wrapping around me like a blanket. Ethan and Lucas were there, their laughter echoing off the walls. They turned as I walked in, and the look in their eyes made my breath catch. You came, Lucas said, his grin wide and inviting. I did, I replied, my voice shaky but determined. Ethan stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine.
I'm glad.
The music swelled, and before I knew it, Lucas had grabbed my hand, pulling me into the center of the room. Dance with me, he said, his voice low and teasing. I laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. Ethan watched us, a small smile playing on his lips. But as the song changed, he stepped in, his hand reaching for mine. My turn, he said, his voice steady, but with a hint of something more. I let him pull me close, his body warm against mine. The world seemed to fade away, leaving only the three of us in that moment. And as the night wore on, I couldn't help but wonder. The music slowed, and so did we, Ethan's hand resting lightly on the small of my back. I could feel the heat of his touch even through the fabric of my blouse. His eyes held mine, and for a moment, the world outside the workshop ceased to exist. There was only the hum of the music, the faint scent of motor oil, and the way his fingers traced small circles on my skin, as if he were memorizing the shape of me. "You're not like anyone I've met before," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. It was the kind of statement that made my stomach flutter, the kind that made me wonder if he could see right through me, through the careful walls I'd built, through the lies I told myself about contentment. I looked away, my cheeks warming. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do," he murmured, and his hand moved just slightly, pulling me closer. My breath hitched, and I glanced over his shoulder, where Lucas was leaning against the workbench, watching us with that same cocky grin. But instead of feeling exposed, I felt alive. Lucas pushed off the bench and sauntered over, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator circling its prey. "Don't hog her, Ethan," he said, his voice teasing but with an edge that sent a shiver down my spine. "She's a living, breathing human being, not one of your damn carburetors." Ethan chuckled, letting me go, but his eyes never left mine. All right. But she's not a project for you to mess with either." Lucas grinned, his eyes locking onto mine. "Oh, I'm not messing with anything. I'm just appreciating." He held out his hand, and I hesitated for just a moment before taking it. His grip was firm, pulling me into him with a confidence that was both exhilarating and unnerving. "Your trouble," I said, my voice soft, but he only laughed, spinning me around as the music picked up again. "Maybe," he said, his voice close to my ear now. "But you like trouble, don't you?" I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. The way my heart raced, the way my body responded to the nearness of them both, it spoke for itself. For the first time in a long time, I felt wanted. Not in the way Ryder wanted me, like a fixture in his life, a piece of furniture he'd grown used to, but truly, passionately desired. The song changed once more, and I found myself in Ethan's arms again, his touch gentle but insistent. "You look like you've got a lot on your mind," he said, his voice soft but probing. I shook my head, trying to brush off the comment. "It's nothing." He tilted his head, studying me. "It doesn't seem like nothing." I sighed, leaning into him without thinking. "It's just complicated." "Life usually is," he said, his thumb brushing against my hip. "But that doesn't mean you have to face it alone." His words struck something deep within me, something I hadn't realized I'd been holding onto so tightly. The idea of not being alone, of not having to carry the weight of my choices by myself. It was alluring, dangerous. "Ava," Lucas called, pulling me out of my thoughts. He was holding out a bottle of beer, his grin wide and inviting. "Come on, take a break. You're thinking too hard." I shook my head, laughing softly. "I'm not sure I've ever been accused of that before." "Well, there's a first time for everything," he said, handing me the bottle. Our fingers brushed, and I felt that same electric current I had earlier, the one that seemed to run between the three of us like an invisible thread. I took a sip, the coolness of the beer a welcome contrast to the warmth of the room. Ethan leaned against the workbench, watching us with that same quiet intensity, while Lucas stood close, his presence almost overwhelming. "So," Lucas said, leaning in slightly, "what's a woman like you doing in a place like this?" I raised an eyebrow. "Is that your best line?" He smirked. "Depends. Is it working?" I laughed, shaking my head. "You're impossible." "That's what they keep telling me," he said, his grin widening. "But I like to think I'm just charmingly persistent." Ethan rolled his eyes, but there was no real irritation in the gesture. If anything, he seemed amused by Lucas's antics. "Don't mind him," he said. "He's like this with everyone." "Not everyone," Lucas corrected, his eyes on me. "Just the ones worth the effort." I felt my cheeks flush, and I took another sip of the beer, trying to steady myself. The air between us felt charged, like a storm was brewing, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to run from it or stand in the middle of it and let the rain wash over me. "You know," Ethan said, his voice pulling me back again, "you don't have to figure it all out right now. Sometimes it's okay to just be." I looked at him, his words sinking in. "Be," I repeated softly. "Yeah," he said, his hand finding mine. "Just be." And for a moment I did. I let myself exist in that space, between Ethan's quiet strength and Lucas's electric energy. I let myself feel, really feel, without the weight of guilt or expectation. It was terrifying and freeing all at once. Lucas stepped closer, his hand brushing against my arm. "You're overthinking again," he said, his voice low. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. "I can't help it." "Sure you can," he said, his fingers trailing down to my wrist. "Just let go." And for a second I did. I let go of the guilt, the doubt, the fear. I let myself exist in the moment, with them, with the music and the laughter, and the way their hands seemed to ignite something in me I thought had long since burned out. But then Ethan's phone buzzed on the workbench, the sound jarring in the otherwise peaceful moment. He glanced at it, his brow furrowing. "Everything okay?" asked, my voice tentative. He nodded, but there was something in his expression that made my stomach twist. "It's nothing, just work stuff." Lucas rolled his eyes. "I swear, you're married to that garage." I flinched at the word, the reality of my own marriage crashing back into me like a tidal wave. Ryder. His face flashed in my mind, his stern features, his distant eyes. I pulled my hand away from Ethan's, stepping back. "I should probably head home," I said, my voice wavering. Lucas frowned. "It's still early." "I know," I said, avoiding his gaze. "But I should go." Ethan watched me, his expression unreadable. "Are you sure?" I nodded, but my chest felt tight, the weight of everything I'd been ignoring pressing down on me.
"Yeah."
"I'm sure." He didn't argue, just nodded.
"All right."
"Let me walk you to your car." I didn't protest, letting him guide me out of the workshop and into the cool night air. The stars were bright overhead, and the silence between us was heavy. "Thank you," I said softly, "for everything." He nodded, his hands in his pockets. "Anytime, Ava." And as I got into my car and started the engine, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen if I stayed? What if I let myself fall into this moment, into this feeling, without looking back? But before I could answer, I drove away, the weight of my choices pressing down on me with every mile. When I got home, Ryder was in bed, asleep. I stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment, the rise and fall of his chest, the way his face looked so peaceful in sleep. And I couldn't help but wonder, when was the last time he'd looked at me like Ethan or Lucas had? When was the last time he'd made me feel alive? I woke up the next morning with a heaviness in my chest, the weight of yesterday's events pressing into me like a dull ache. Ryder was already gone, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, but his absence felt more pronounced than usual. The bed was cold where he'd slept, the sheets pulled taut, as if he hadn't moved at all during the night. I stared at the empty space beside me, the silence of the house wrapping around me like a blanket I didn't ask for. I need to get out of here, I thought, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. My skin felt too tight, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't silence. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a sweater, slipping my feet into worn sneakers and grabbed my car keys. Without thinking, I drove toward Ethan's shop, the same road I'd traveled just yesterday. It felt familiar and foreign all at once, the lines on the pavement blurring as I turned into the gravel lot. The shop was quiet, the early morning sunlight casting long shadows across the building. Ethan was already there, tinkering with an engine under the hood of a sleek black car. He looked up as I approached, wiping his hands on a rag tucked into his back pocket. His flannel shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, the fabric clinging to his frame in a way that made my stomach twist. "Ava," he said, his voice low and warm, like the first sip of coffee on a cold morning. "What brings you here so early?" I shifted on my feet, my fingers curling around the strap of my purse. I needed to clear my head. Thought I'd see if you were around." He studied me for a moment, his dark eyes searching mine. "You okay?" "Not really," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Yesterday was the lot." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "Come on," he said, gesturing toward the shop. "I've got some coffee inside. You look like you could use it." I followed him, the smell of oil and metal mingling with the rich aroma of coffee. The shop was surprisingly cozy, a small table in the corner cluttered with tools and half-empty mugs. Ethan poured me a cup, handing it to me with a quiet smile. Our fingers brushed, and I felt that familiar spark, the one that had been growing since the moment he'd stopped to help me on the side of the road. "Thanks," I murmured, taking a sip. The coffee was strong, just the way I liked it, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "So," Ethan said, leaning against the counter, "you want to talk about it?" I shook my head, my gaze fixed on the steaming cup in my hands. "Not really. I feel like I'm at a crossroads, you know? Like I'm standing on the edge of something, but I don't know if I should jump." He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on mine. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "we don't know what we want until we take the leap." I looked up at him, my heart pounding in my chest. His words felt like a key, unlocking something deep inside me. Is this what I've been waiting for? Is he the leap I need to take? Before I could answer, the bell above the shop door jingled, and Lucas strolled in, his cocky grin already in place. Well, he said, his eyes flicking between us. "Looks like I'm interrupting something." Ethan straightened, his expression shifting into something more neutral. "Just having coffee." Ava stopped by. Lucas said, his gaze lingering on me. "Early morning visit, huh? Must have been a rough night." I felt my cheeks flush, but I didn't look away. "Something like that," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Lucas laughed, a low, rich sound that sent a shiver down my spine. "Well, don't let me stop you too. I've just got some paperwork to do." He winked at me before heading toward the office, his presence lingering long after he disappeared behind the door. I turned back to Ethan, my pulse still racing. "He's something else." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "That's one way to put it. But he's a good guy. Just takes some getting used to." "I can see that," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. The tension between us was still there, but it felt softer now, more manageable. "Thanks for the coffee. And for listening." "Anytime," he said, his voice warm. "You know where to find me." I nodded, finishing the last of my coffee. As I set the mug down, our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. There was something in his gaze, something that made my breath catch. What if I stayed? What if I let myself fall into this moment, into this feeling? But before I could act, the sound of Lucas's voice drifted from the office, pulling me back to reality.
"Hey, Ethan."
"You've got a call online too." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Duty calls," he said, his tone apologetic. "I'll see you around, Ava." "Yeah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "See you around." I walked back to my car, the morning air cool against my skin. As I slid into the driver's seat, I glanced back at the shop, my heart pounding in my chest. What am I doing? I thought, gripping the steering wheel. What do I really want? But the answer didn't come. Not yet.